start. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It. We're here to talk about childhood sexual crimes and destigmatize those crimes. Many people don't want to talk about it. We do. With me today is Stewart Thomspon. He's known as the Unforgiven Warrior. He works at the Gatehouse in Toronto, Ontario. They're a safe haven for those of us that have come through childhood sexual crimes. I am so happy to have Stewart with us here today. I can't tell you how happy I am. I wanted to start with that 1 in 6 men, by the time they're 18, will have been sexually abused. Only about 20% of those men will actually come forward and report those crimes. So you can imagine the numbers are much higher than that. So Stewart, I like to ask people when they join me what their motivation is for being here. You do so much internationally for all of us survivors. So I just want to start with that question about your motivation.
Well, thank you so much, Jody, for having me here today. Quite honored to be here. To your question, well, my motivation is probably most obvious, and that would be my experience. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, which started from a very, very young age of 5, 6, and carried on until I was a teenager. So that is primarily my motivation, along with the collateral damage that came along with it that drives me to be here today. So yeah, that's pretty much how it started, and it led off to a whole bunch of things in my life, which I'm still kind of amazed I'm still here today from all that.
Yeah, you know what? I really actually want to honor the fact that you're here. So many of us don't make it out. I have personal friends that through drug addiction, they didn't make it out. They're gone. And I'll be 60 next year and they're not standing next to me. And it's heartbreaking. So I'm so happy that you did make it out and you have a full life. With that, could you bring us into your story? I saw your video on the World Health Organization, and you start with that your abuse starts about 6 or 7. Can you talk to us about who the perpetrator was, kind of where you are? Just bring us into your story.
Yeah, so I hear stories all the time, and it always makes me think about my own story. We often hear about people who perpetrate. I know that on social media I see this all the time, and not only that, with the work that I do, so I hear where it comes from all the time. So in my experience, it was a neighbor down the hall, right? And all my experiences have been with people I don't know, just people that knew my family, and but nobody in my family perpetrated me, or rather, sexually assaulted me. Everybody that done that, when my experience started was, well, for example, my neighbor down the hall. People often say, well, it's always 90% somebody who we know, right? And the other 10% is, well, a stranger down the hall, like I'm talking about, a stranger on the street, who knows, right? But my experience started then, and my first perpetrator was a male. And my experience, unfortunately, carried into women being involved over a period of years. I don't need to get into graphics other than the fact that it happened. But nonetheless, I want to involve both parties, because I want people out there to understand that even little boys will be offended by women as well as men.
Absolutely.
And this doesn't get talked about enough because of I don't know whether why that is, but or probably old beliefs, I would say, going back many, many years, where it's first off, you need to realize that it's men who mostly offend anyway to begin with, but women do it as well. And that greatly affected me over my life to where I am now, such as trusting people. But to your question, yes.
Right.
It could be the person down the hall. It could be anybody. You would never know. Some people you can't tell. It's not like they have a sign. Although I have that feeling I can smell one a mile away now, because I know how they work and what they do. But that was my experience. How it started with me.
Right. And you know, Stuart, I want to tell you that my mother was also a pedophile in our home, and that is not talked about a lot. People believe, I mean, I like you, I hear many stories, and I have heard mothers, while if not implicit, they're in the room and that sort of thing. My mother was quite involved in a few times with my story. Not my dad probably did 90% of the abuse, but my mother was involved 10% of the time. And I think it is important because talk about bringing those stigmas down and those the things that are false around these crimes, right? That women aren't involved. They wouldn't be with these men if they weren't somewhat like them. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And again, I mean, I have no idea. Obviously, I'm not going to get into psychology behind it right now today, uh, but obviously, I always think that, okay, well, if both are doing it, and like you're talking about, obviously, the first thing I come to with the work that I do, something has happened to them, so therefore they're passing it down, and that seems to be the way it works, with an exception of there's some crazies out there that haven't had that experience. They're just plain crazy. Again, I'm not getting
Right.
get into the psychology of it because I am nowhere near an expert on it, other than what my experiences and what I've
Right.
heard. So
Well, I don't think that we can understand a criminal mind, so you're safe. You're safe in that, right?
yeah,
So, how did they? I like to talk about because people read about it in books, but they don't really talk about the grooming that happens to a child. And so, if you could, if you're comfortable with that, if you could talk
yeah.
about how the neighbor kind of groomed you into this environment with him.
Well, when you talk about grooming, grooming is rather elusive term I think they use, because really, and a lot of time, like in my case, for example, and I'm going back to the early 60s when this happened. Um, my groomer really didn't groom me. If he groomed me, it was by cigarettes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how it was done, I mean, he just did it. It was like control and done. Here, follow me. And there was no like candies or this or that.
Mm-hmm.
No, it was just his fetish of, it's going to sound horrible, but making me smoke while the act was being performed. Right. So there was really no like, oh, come with me and I'm going to take care of you, and none of that. I never got any of that. Are you kidding? If you watched my group
Right.
presentation, one of my offenders, he didn't do that to me whatsoever. He would, I don't need to get into it, but anyway, he would threaten me, he would hurt me, and tell me that if I said anything, he would come after me and my family. So there was no joy
Mm.
and prerequisite to the actual action, if that makes any sense.
It
So when you
does.
talk about grooming, I think it's really loose kind of a term, because
Mm-hmm.
no, he grabs me, does the thing, does the act, and that's it. No, and nothing after that. Right. So
Yeah, I think that's actually a really valid point because often I talk to people and the act happens quickly. And then to continue that, they'll always have some kind of a reward, whether it's a cigarette or not. Like it's the secret place they take you, right? And so I do think that people, it's not always this kindness. In incestuous homes, it's often love, love withheld, that kind of thing, very much because, it was my parents. But I think that you're right, Stuart. I think it's a very valid point that and also, nobody had talked to you about if somebody does this, yell, right? I mean, this is
no.
something that, again, that we need to do is then why didn't you go home and tell? Because nobody has talked to us. Now, today, we do talk to children more. But in the 60s, I know all of my rapes and all that started happening in the early 60s as well. Nobody talked about it. We weren't going to go to school and talk about it.
And it's funny because I remember, I'm thinking way back, and I remember telling my mother. I wasn't raised by my mother. I remember telling my mother, and nothing ever became of it. Nothing ever became of it.
She didn't even ask you questions about it.
Yeah. Well, she did, but it didn't go very far. Like I told her, and that's where it stopped. And that, and I don't, and I need to bring this into the conversation as well. This happened to my younger brother as well. You talk about losing people. My brother took his life because of this, and I know many
Oh,
other people have had the same situation where their brother has done the exact same thing, right? And again,
right.
it falls back to not being able. I mean, it wasn't in the culture then. It wasn't in the conversation. So just like him, like
Exactly.
me, who do you tell when you have no one to tell?
Right. And you two then didn't discuss this with each other when you were young.
No, not at all, not at all.
Right.
Although I think we both knew it was happening, and at one period in my life, I knew that this was happening to my younger brother, and right to the point of his, to the point where he passed away. Right.
Wow. How old was he when he passed away?
He was going into his 18th birthday when
Oh
he.
my goodness. I am so sorry.
Uh,
You and I talked before we began recording, and I think all of us know people that
yeah.
don't make it out. And so with that, your story then leads you onto the streets, right? At 18. So your
Yeah.
brother doesn't make it. So
Yeah.
you've already just shared with us your mom wasn't in the home. So were you raised by your father or your
Oh,
grandparents?
I would kind of bounce around from, well, I mean, it was always within the family, but never outside the family. Like my grandparents primarily raised me. My mother had me for a short time. My father had me for a short time, but I bounced around. My younger brother and I, we bounced around all the time from a very, very young age. So we never really, not that we didn't so much have a completely stable home. I think my grandparents on my father's side really tried to provide that for us, which was really good because my father was not a parent and neither was my mother. Both of them are, well, I'm gonna, I call, I mean, I think we were just all illegitimate children that just came up from their one night stands or whatever the case might have been. But either way, they're both my parents were not good examples for marriage and all that good stuff, but it never happened. So to your question, yeah, no, I bounced around from home to home or from province to province, and never really felt safe wherever I went. So basically, when I
Right.
moved from Ontario to Quebec or to Nova Scotia, I got abused there too. So again, I was only a kid, so I
See, and
never.
that right, and we talk about grooming, but really your childhood prepared you to not have any boundaries, to not
Yeah,
have any safe place to fall. And these are important messages because while we're doing more around the foster care system and all that, there's just not enough being done. I'm a CASA worker here in Montana,
yeah,
and I'm just stunned at some of the situations that kids find themselves in. And so it's why, I push myself to find the time to help those children. And anyway, that's just another thing that we do. But see, the life that you were born into didn't tell you that you had value, that you were worth safety. All of these things are part of grooming that people don't understand, that we come kind of with these built-in things. I never had one message in my childhood that I could even talk about help. You know what I mean? Help wasn't even a word that I understood.
well, the only thing I knew about help was I was watching a TV commercial or Gilligan's Island, and where they got help on there, hoping that somebody would fly over. And that's the only help I've ever seen or acknowledged. Other than that, and to this realm, it was never there.
Right. And so I did hear then in your interview with Who that you talked about going onto the streets, and then you actually had another sexual crime perpetrated against you on the streets.
Yeah,
If you talk about only
actually,
as much if you're comfortable with that, but I think a lot of people find themselves in that situation as well, right? I don't have a home, but I need to get the hell out of all of this shit. And
yeah.
so then you find yourself on the streets. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, like I mean, I come across this quite often with the type of work that I do. It's not unusual for uh, you know, given our experience and not feeling safe. So what we're going to do, I go into automatic, and I'd rather walk away and go on the street, knowing that I probably feel safer on the streets, and that's precisely what happened to me. But
Mm.
saying in the same sentence, I did get abused as well, and I mean it happened more than I cared to, more than I mentioned on the documentary that I did. Again, people don't need to know all the details, but feeling safe on the street was the only place I felt safe, and I did not feel didn't felt I felt I didn't belong anywhere. So therefore, these kind of situations, not just for me but for others, men, women included, it'll happen, right? And uh, that was a very dark time in my life. So, that just added to the fire, if I can put it in that context,
Mm.
of my beliefs and not wanting, or rather not wanting to be around anybody, not wanting to trust anybody, including myself, moving forward. So that was just another bad, sorry about the phone. That's just another bad experience that I endured. Um, uh, you know, I was I was how old was I? God, I was under 20. I wasn't even 20 yet, but I was very young and impressionable, confused, lots of things going on, right? I was
Right.
dealing with I was heavy into drugs, and any chance I could numb myself, like even in those experiences, well, that would happen, right? Um, I'd go and they get me high, and then they can just take advantage of me, right?
Right. So, right. And what you just explained to us was childhood sexual crimes that began at 6, and you just told us went on into your 20s. When we talk about this kind of severe trauma in people's lives, the same thing happened to me. My abuse started actually before I turned 4, because we moved out of that house, and my father didn't stop raping me until I left his home at 17 and got into an abusive marriage. But I didn't care because I just wanted away from him. That kind of trauma really affects us. And I like to talk about those effects because, again, we become really strong people, but it's not without a battle. It's not without intentionality around our, healing modalities and all that. But talk to me a little bit about, I was in a 17-year really abusive marriage. Like, I have scars on my body from it. Talk to me about how that blended in your relationships with men and women, because both you and I had trauma, sexual trauma against our bodies from men and women. And that just F's you up in a huge way. So how did that kind of play out in your life, and what did your relationships look like?
That's a really good question, because when I think even after what happened to me, even in my late teens, early 20s, moving forward, that just any relationship that I had, even my first marriage, my ex-wife was a survivor as well, which I didn't even know until many years after the fact, many years after the fact. But it really explains a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Our dynamics of how our marriage worked, or rather more didn't work, right? Because
Boy, I
when we talk
understand.
about, sorry?
I said, I understand that, Stewart.
When we talk about collateral damage, part of the collateral damage that happens to us is, while I talked about trust, and I talked about boundaries, or rather, I'm going to include boundaries into that, and just not having a sense of being able to make that connection when you think it is. Well, you're young and impressionable, and you meet somebody and you fall head over heels for that person, thinking that, oh my God, this is going to be it. I'm going to be good now. I don't have to think about my past, and I can just move on with my future. Well, really, the reality is that's not the case at all. With having no boundaries, as one example, and not trusting anybody, and really, especially not trusting myself, and not really knowing who I am, because think about it, what happened to us? We lose our identity as children. So when we become an adult, well, who are we? Are we that child that we lost that innocence, or are we just are we a young adult that knows nothing? And really, that's what it came down to in my experience. I knew nothing. I knew nothing about a relationship. I knew nothing about connection, and therefore, our marriage did not last. So when it comes to men and women in general, overall, to your question, from that point, even before that point, there was never a trust. Rather, I could never trust anybody to any degree. And whenever I did trust anybody, it was usually let down. And the hard part about this is because the people I ended up trusting, that never did me wrong, those are the people I walked away from, and those are the people that I should have stayed with, because they were good people. They didn't judge, they didn't do anything, but I was just
Scared of them.
yeah.
I have been really scared of what I didn't know, right? And so listening to you, I came out the same way. I stayed in a really abusive marriage for 18 years because I didn't know any better. It was an evil I knew. He ended up sexually abusing my children. He was very emotionally and physically abusive, but it was what I knew. Like, he was better than my dad, right? He didn't kill anybody. So, when we think about these things, you're right. We come out, we don't have clue one, how to survive, who to trust. We don't trust anybody. But like you said, just to go out on the streets or wherever we find our place that's away from where we came from, we don't usually land in a safe place, right? It wasn't safe. And so, right. I don't think many of us do. And otherwise, people, I have known some people that get into relationships and then they just go numb and disappear, right? That whole comfortably numb, or they're alcoholics, but they don't talk about it, right? And so I feel like listening to your story though, you were kind of actively fighting in your early 20s, fighting against what you came through. Even though we don't have the tools, did you feel like you were kind of actively trying to get out of that box that you'd been handed that was just
Well,
a shit show essentially?
yeah, I think I wasn't directly, if that makes any sense, but no, I did not. You know, I had a head on my shoulders, but really, that head was not really.
Yeah. So right. I talk about that a lot. We're prisoners by crimes that we didn't commit. Right. And so we're stumbling through life. I loved that you said, we think we're going to leave our past behind when we fall in love. Doesn't, and unless we explore that past, it comes directly with us. Right. And so people talk to me a lot about how that plays out in your sexual life today. And, I blog a lot about that and have talked to people around the world. It's complicated. It's
Very complicated.
complicated. I mean, right? Can you talk about that a little bit? I know, and again, just what you're comfortable with, but it's very complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated because I think the biggest thing that people don't, or there may be the biggest misconception I think people don't see is that, okay, we look at TV and we see, great families and, they interact, they communicate, good and bad, they love each other. Well, in my reality, it wasn't like that. Even in my family dynamics, it was never like that. I never experienced that, only what I saw on TV. And TV was not the same thing as my reality. It was like totally opposite. So here I am going within all these expectations and not dealing with my own shit at the time was really the big part of not understanding, not making that connection. Because really, when it comes down to it, I would say I was lost. Right. I had this grandeur dream that it was going to be like this, but really it wasn't like that whatsoever at all. When we got into our connection with my ex-wife at the time, with my wife at that time, we thought it was there. I mean, it was all great and wonderful, but the weird part of it was both of us were coming out of our own crap at the time, and we had these dreams of what it could be like. Well, once we got together and we had a daughter and other life challenges came in, no, it just wasn't there. It just wasn't there. We couldn't find it. Either one of us could find it.
Well, it's two broken people coming together, and I think that happens a lot because they call them trauma bonds, right?
Yeah, trauma bonding basically was to one another at the time, but the thing was, though, we did not know what our traumas were.
Right.
So
you had put it away. So is this kind of that trauma amnesia? I'm just going to go forward, this comes up in almost every interview. I've only been doing this for a couple of weeks, but I'll tell you, it is so true that it's like we open a box, we shove all of the garbage in there, we close the box and we seal it with 17 locks. And we think that's going to keep it put away. When did your trauma start coming out? And when did you what was the thing that changed your life around to turn you? There's always this pivotal point, right? For me, it was 18 years of a horrifying marriage. And I saw that I was losing my kids to this man and I had to go. So that for me at 35, I thought, if this is as good as life gets, I'm absolutely screwed. So I left. Talk to me about your pivotal point.
That's a really good question, because what people don't understand is that, okay, I can go way back to what we were talking about, like even with your last question. And, when we lock it all up, like you talked about, right? What really happens when you do that is it's kind of like bottling your emotions, right? So I bottled all my emotions, but the problem with that is, at that time, and including my ex, is that when we do that, sometimes the crack opens and some kind of emotion will come out and we don't even know what that emotion is. But somehow it's related to what happened to us in the past. So when I talk about an emotion that comes out of that little crack in the box with all the locks on it, could be everything from anger to trust issues to, maybe I feel insecure now. Maybe this person is not good for me. Maybe I need to. Well, my marriage ended bad, so which I don't need to get into details. But nevertheless, it ended because those cracks in that box, all those locks in, these emotions are coming out, not just on my side, but even on my ex-wife's side. And we didn't even understand what they were. So moving forward in life, that box that with all the locks on it, as you described, the cracks got bigger and bigger and the locks come off, and therefore more and more came out. I'm talking about emotion now. like internalized emotions. You know, when I talk about anger, for example, that came out. I mean, I would act angrily, and I have no idea why I would do that. Even my ex-wife would do that. I've met other survivors doing the same thing and tell me the same thing, that they would act that way and not even know why. Right?
Right. Absolutely. Because anger can't stand alone. There's always an emotion underneath it. There's something, it's telling a story that hasn't been realized. Right. But I love that you brought up our emotions are gone, Stewart. Like when I grew up, my husband and I were watching a show last night, and this little girl was crying because she had a loss. And I looked at him and I said, I never cried as a child, never. And a horrible shit happened. But you know what? I never cried because emotions, I couldn't afford emotions. But then you get in these relationships when you're an adult and they expect us to bring emotions. We don't have any, right? And so like you say, but then bad emotions start erupting, right? So now your marriage has failed and you're out in life on your own, and you're going to come to this pivotal point, or was it just these small accruals that started changing your life?
Yeah, it was pretty much that. Like, I mean, I had all kinds of events. I never had a relationship I couldn't destroy. Right.
I understand that.
I couldn't, a relationship, whether it be intimate or friendship, because I always believed, you know, in that box I talk about, well, trust is one thing, and then believing in myself. Well, I didn't, you know, and I was always worried, well, what if somebody found out about my story? How are they going to treat me? So I never really
Different.
talked about it. Right.
Right. They treat us different. I mean, the truth is, because let's just talk about, let's destigmatize that. The truth is they treat us differently. I had a counselor that said, Jody, don't lead with your story, because people need to learn who you are first before they learn about your story. And I think because we do that trauma response thing, right? Like, this is who I am, and you need to know. So like when our memories come back, and we start living our story, we want to tell everybody. But the truth is they can't handle our story, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's just a real thing. One of the things I really like to talk about, because with survivors of extended trauma, like you and I both have lived through, comfort, the word comfort, it's almost non-existent in our lives. How did comfort exist? How did you find it? For me, alcohol comforted me a lot. At the end of the day, I couldn't wait to have wine because it's just such a great comfort. So what did comfort look like in your life, or just was it not there? And maybe how is it there today? Let's just talk about it a little bit.
Well, you know, through all those years, I'd say most of my comfort was getting high, because what it did was, okay, so right off the bat, and I know you understand this, is that I only knew numb, right? You know, most of my life I spent feeling numb.
Yep.
So how I can beat that numbness was, when I got home, I would get high and I would feel good. So I only knew numb or getting high or feeling good. That was only thing I knew. The other feelings, well, they're insignificant because I wouldn't allow those other feelings to be part of who I was, obviously not knowing really who I was to begin with. So, you know, when you walk around all day and you have that horrible feeling inside, and you feel numb, and the only way you can be distracted from it is, well, for me, it was getting high or getting drunk or whatever the case may be, or a distraction of going to work, or something that would completely take my mind off my past. But when that didn't happen, I only knew numb, and I would go back into my proverbial rabbit hole of my abuse as a child, and I would stay there, and I would have a hard time getting out of that. You know, and that, I think that was probably, I mean, maybe you can relate to this, you know, holding on to this all those years and never really being able to talk about it. And if you did, we were able to talk about it. It's kind of like what you said earlier. Well, who do you trust to talk about it? Well, my experiences being people that I've have talked to about it in the past were, and I hate to say this, but some of my girlfriends in the past, I have mentioned it to, but again, it comes down to, well, they were survivors as well. My ex-wife and even some of the other girlfriends I had, somehow were drawn to one another. I don't know how, but anyway, my point being is that it was never good. Like, I mean, it was good in the beginning, but that numbness would always come into the play, and then when that numbness came into the play, there's no connection. You know, how are we going? We don't communicate. You know, how can it possibly be good? Like, you see on TV. Well, I know in reality it's not like that. I'm just using that as an analogy, but nevertheless, but no, that those
So
feelings.
there wasn't a whole lot of comfort anywhere.
No, there is no comfort. There was no comfort there to your question whatsoever. And I know other people can really appreciate this what I'm talking about because they've been through the same experience.
Right.
You know, to go to work to get away from your abuse or to get away from thinking about your abuse or going, like I would go to clubs sometimes and I just get so trashed and well, trashed, but feeling good. So I didn't
Right.
have that numbness. But the only problem with that, and others I know will appreciate this, if you're struggling with addictions, is that yeah, that numbness comes back when you wake up in the morning. So really,
You're
it
exactly the same.
exactly the
Right.
same.
You're exactly the same. So what I really heard you explain was you actually kind of ran from comfort because there was no comfort. And it is why I like to bring it up, because to understand us, right, as people who have lived through these tragedies, we're strong, incredible people. And I love to say that too. And we're going to talk about all your accomplishments before we go. But you know what? That comfort changes a person. Like your parents weren't there to comfort you. Those basic fundamental needs that everybody else, many people that don't come through that, they have love, unconditional love. They have comfort. They're covered up. Like I used to have this weird thought that what would it be like to be covered up with a blanket and gone to sleep in safety, because my room wasn't safe. Nights became a terror zone for me because I never knew when somebody was coming in next.
Mhm.
And so, just those basic things, comfort is elusive for us, right? And so today I find great comfort in talking to you, actually, Stewart, because like you said, when you talk to people, they'll give you like 2 minutes, and that's actually a minute longer than they want to give us, but they get to talk about their stories all the time. And that's hard because what you're really doing is invalidating me. I don't get to come to the table because I get to hear about your golfing experience. I get to hear about all the times you went camping. I got to hear about the 70s and how great it was. Well, the truth is this is who I am. I can't deny. I mean, I can talk to you about watching a movie with my dad and making popcorn. There's a few good things, but you know what? In reality, Stuart, everything that I want to bring to the table, people don't want to hear. Isn't that hard?
Yeah, it's very, very hard. And you see, going back to your original question in the beginning there about, why I want to be here. Well, this is exactly why, because you know what, if I don't do it, who the hell else is going to do it?
Exactly.
Right. And if I do that, that means I'm being submissive and I'm sitting back and they're winning. Right. So if I don't do what I'm doing, then who the hell is going to do it? Who's going to say it? And not only that, but it's breaking the stigma of being able to talk about it. So why not start with me and other people?
Amen, brother. That 100%. I was talking to this one lady the other day, and she'd written a book, and in her book, she said, I am not going to change my story to make it easier for you. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we shouldn't have to.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about some hard things, but really,
right.
When we talk about, when we talk about community and we talk about, mental health and all the other things involved with that. Granted, okay, we're not living 100 years 100 years ago anymore. If we are progressing as in humanity to any level, then this is part of it. And if you want to include mental health, well, this is one part of the mental health that needs to be addressed, because I really don't believe moving into to 25th or 26th century, moving forward, like 200 years from now, we shouldn't even be having this conversation. Moving forward.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, that would be really wonderful. But unfortunately, we're living 100, 500 years ago, depending on your culture too, is a huge thing as well, because if you do your research in pedophilia, it goes way back centuries, right?
Oh, it's been around forever. And the Lolita thing, and Freud saying crazy women actually have all been sexually abused, right? And then he got actually silenced because probably 1 in 5 men next to him were pedophiles. So yeah, it's a huge stigma around all of this stuff that we need to, once people begin to understand and meet us. I wanted them to see us, right? And not just read my words, because people will read my book and say, oh my God, they just don't even know how to. This one man out of the UK said, I just can't sympathize with Jody because she wants to love her father, but she should want to murder him, because you don't understand how the complicated relationships that come through this. While I understand it today, the love card is very difficult when you come through homes of incest and you continue to pick abusers and all of that stuff because it's what we know.
Yeah.
So one of the other things I really like to focus on, because it's so big, and I just noticed that there's a lot of faith hurt, God hurt around these stories. And so while I am not any kind of, I don't have, you know what I mean? Like this isn't, but I just noticed this is a big thing. So I wanted to talk to you about, where was God in your childhood for you and where is he today? Because I notice there's either an absence or a hate. I just noticed there's a lot of pain around this for people who come through big tragedy. So again, being me, I like to talk about these big issues. And so just talk to me a little bit about that. We don't have to delve into it a lot, but I'm curious
Well,
where he was in your story.
yeah, well, you know what? God was really never in my life to begin with. I'm not really I mean, I was baptized Christian, but that's not really what I follow. I'm more of a spiritual person. I tend to believe what First Nations people believe about the Creator, the land, the universe. That's kind of where I'm coming from. I learned from a very young age that if I prayed to God, God didn't help me. And when I look all around and I hear all the stuff in the world about people relying on God to help them through this process, well, I'm not saying it hasn't helped them, but what about, where was God when this was happening to you, right? If you talk about religion coming into this, and I've heard so much from so many people where religion was actually they're evil, that it happened to them.
Yes, right.
So, you know, I saw, to your question, no, God is nowhere near in my playing field in regards to my recovery or in my past. I could not. I've tried, and I was brought up on those beliefs, but those beliefs do not sit well with me. Not only from my own experience, but from what I've seen from others, and I've talked to thousands of people, literally, from around the world. When you talk about God, the first thing you're going to say is, "What the hell are you talking about?" You know?
Right. Because you're right. Many offenders, I don't know if it's true in Canada, but most offenders stay very close to religion. And there is this huge thing. It's why I like to talk about it, because it's usually a very deep hurt with people, which leads me kind of into the next thing about justice. Stewart, was there any justice in your life ever for any of these crimes that you went through at all?
None whatsoever. My justice right now is me talking about it. And I was very lucky about 2017 through Justice Canada. They did an article about me, which was really nice of them to do that. And that's the length of my justice, where I got to talk about my story to any detail, and it was publicized across our nation. So when we talk about justice,
which is awesome. I applaud them for doing that. That's so cool. And again, I am so proud of you for the man that you are. Just so proud, but keep going.
Thank you. But yeah, no, and I really don't foresee that even happening in the future. So my justice is me being here talking with you and talking with other survivors around the world. To me, that will be my only justice. And for me to go through the court system, especially here in Canada, which really sucks, by the way, and even in this province, the conviction rate for not just for child molestation, but for rapes towards women and men the conviction rate is very low, and the sentences are really horrible. Like any given time, it's nothing like, well, I know in some parts of the states where you are, you'll get a 25-year sentence just for anything related to that, right? And which is far greater sentences for that crime. So, when it comes to justice, no, I really don't have a whole lot of faith in our justice system. And that's also our justice system is a colonial based. So our justice system is totally different than what the American system would be, because you guys, made your own. I mean, you were influenced by the colonials, but in the end, when you became independent in 1812, you created your own laws and you did your own thing. As we didn't. We stayed, and we have laws that we still use, from pre-Confederation, that are way outdated, especially when it comes to sex crimes, whether it be towards children or women or whoever. They're greatly outdated and very unfair.
Yeah, see, and that those reforms need to happen so much, because listening to you, I can feel because I understand so much the lack of justice, though, it affects us. We live with it and we choose to say we're going to be good with this, but it doesn't feel good, Stuart. It doesn't feel good. My children also went through that. No justice. I mean, we went to the police and they're like, "Oh, it was a long time ago. It was just touching." All of this just dismissal and minimization. And the lack of justice, though, I think helps addictions. It helps depression. I don't know if you're familiar with the ACEs study. It is
Yes.
the CDC, right, comes up with what should we do to minimize all of these adult diseases and mental illnesses. And you know what they find out? Childhood crimes, all of these crimes that happened in childhood and the trauma that is coming forth is our problem. But what are they doing about it? So justice is this elusive term that I have to tell you, though, it's cost me a lot of sleepless nights. It's cost me a lot of drunk nights. It's cost me a lot of relationships. I'm going to be honest, right? And while I sit peacefully with it today, it doesn't feel good, does it?
No, not at all. And with the type of work that I do, I see it every day in my face. Like here at the Gatehouse, I mean, this is an investigation center as well. So we have children coming in here. So
Oh, wow.
at the same time, so I see it, I see it head on, right, every day. Not just hearing it from adults, but from children, and what you see in the media as well. So I don't escape it, as seeing it. So
Oh,
it really
wow.
makes me think and wonder. Like, I mean, sure, it's heavy in the heart, but at the same time, when is change really going to happen? When is it going to get better, right? So then it comes back to what I was saying. It comes back to you and I talking about this here now. That's where it's going to start. To whatever
Right.
degree and when, I don't know. Well, I think it's already kind of starting in some little pockets here and there. But the more we bring people aware of it, well, if you're going to bring morality into this, well, they need to adjust that as well, because some people's moralities, when we go back to religion and the crime, doesn't match, right? So
Right.
we have a long
Oh,
way to
you're
go.
right. You're so right about that. It's very true. So we talked about a lot about the negative effects. So, there's many people that are out here that have lived through really bad crimes that say, I'm stronger as a result. I grapple with saying that like that. Before I turned 4, I witnessed a murder and all these things. I'm not sure that I wouldn't want to be in somebody else's childhood, but I like who I am today. I'm comfortable with it. Would I wish that on myself? Probably not. So while I'm an incredibly strong person and I really rised, high in the ranks of law firms and all of those things, how would you answer that question? How has it affected you in a positive way? I'm not going to facilitate that anymore. I want you to answer that.
Well, that's a really good and hard question at the same time. But when I look for the good in this, I've had this question put to me before, and I had to think really long and hard about that, because what brought me here to begin with was not good to begin with, so where do I get the strength out of what I've done for myself and moving forward to any degree to where I am at today? So what's the positive behind this? Well, I think there's a lot of positives behind this. And one, right off the bat, is I'm alive and I'm here now and I'm talking to you. Two, being that, yes, I may not have justice, but I have me and I actually like myself now. Again, which kind of falls back from number one. But when we talk about strength and resilience, and I hate using the word resilience because it's so taken out of context sometimes, but my resilience and my strength comes from me bettering myself, me getting away from the wanting to be high all the time, me wanting to live, me wanting to talk to other survivors that have had this experience, letting them know that they're not alone, and letting them know that you can love yourself again. When you never loved yourself, that's a huge thing to say after all that time, that yeah, I love myself now. And I couldn't even say that 3 years ago or 4 years ago. I mean, I had to do it in steps. I went from like to love myself. And even love still for me is a very, very strong word, and it's kind of like it should be it's kind of like using the profanity words, like it's a 4-letter word, and really, what does it mean?
It
Right?
doesn't mean it's like comfort, right? When you don't
Yeah.
have a definition or any example in your life, right? Keep going
Oh.
though, right? I get it.
So my strength comes from what I'm doing, and sure, I'm not going to get back what I lost. Just no different than you and all the others, and anybody else that's had this experience. I'll never get back what I lost, whether it be my childhood or really good relationships. I'll never get that back where I walked away.
Mhm.
But my strength is today, is I'm here, I'm talking to you, and I've had some wonderful things happen to me from this experience. Well, people may not see it the same way that I do, but I find that it's a really good experience. Rather, I find it's really self-empowering, and the fact that I have this connection with people, which I never had, all from my experiences childhood. So where I've lost, I've actually gained in regards to self-respect, loving myself, connecting with others. I've been able to, like, even that Who presentation. Who in their right mind would ever imagine? Sure, what I was talking about was horrible stuff, but I don't know anybody who's done that, right? Who's had the opportunity to do that, to go there in front of people from around the world and talk about something that happened to you as a child, and be supported on that. It's like, to me, that's incredible.
It's huge. It's very cool. And listening to you, one of the things I've never articulated until listening to you is the fact that we do know who we are. It's like the man who wrote The Body Keeps the Score. He said the
Yes.
hardest part is knowing what you know. Do you know how many millions of people live, Stewart, with their stories hidden? And those stories don't even include severe abuse like we do. They don't
Yeah.
even know who they are, or they continue to tell their dad's story or their grandpa's story and keep the legacy of the family alive, but they don't know who they are. And I think that's beautiful. What you just said is we do indeed know who we are through all of the trials and tribulations and the triumphs, right? We know who we are. I think that's just beautiful. That it was almost revelatory in that sense, even though I think that a lot of people do live as strangers to themselves. I do. And that you know what I mean? And who gets this opportunity like you did to be international, which go ahead. Nope. Go right ahead.
I was going to say too, another thing I did, which I haven't really emphasized or really mentioned, is I've been doing podcasts for over 10 years now, and
that's
I was doing
awesome.
them before they were cool. But I talk about childhood social abuse. So really, I have no crazy production behind it. I don't have any fancy this or fancy that. I just call it personal transformation. Hell, the platform I've used it on all those years, I didn't even make I just let them do the introduction, and I haven't said anything fancy because I did it with the conception over 10 years ago that I'm just going to talk about childhood social abuse. I'm not looking for people, audiences, or anything like that. I just looked at it as a spot where I could say what I was thinking and feeling. And at that time, I was already connected with the Gatehouse. So anything I was talking about was my own feelings and experience to my recovery. So I got a huge amount of strength out of that, and self-confidence in doing so. And again, I was never trying to capture the world audience in regards to my healing experience. I really just did it for me. I didn't do it for anybody else.
I love that. Would it be okay if we dropped that link in the description of this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome.
But my point behind that is that, when I talk about strength and resilience, and I never really realized now that all that stuff that I've done, and I've got literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of audio of me talking about my experience, and I have other guests that have come on as well, clinicians, other survivors, but now my stuff is being used in colleges and universities as part of their studies. So something has come out of it, something positive. And in the beginning, I did this not with the conception of that or anything other than, this is me, this is my voice, this is me finding my voice. I listen and I see other podcasts and go, wow, they got thousands and thousands of listens. Well, I'm not talking about anything glorious here. Trust me.
I know exactly what you mean. I always think, who wants to know my story? But there's millions of us that do.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not glorious is what I'm saying. It's
I
not
know.
like I'm not listening to top 40 on a Saturday night. It's
Right.
nothing happy, right? Well, sure, there's happiness in there in between. There's laughter and there's tears, but I never did it with the conception of you're going to listen to me. I did it for me. That's all, right? And 10 years later, it's there. I'm not doing them as often as I like to because of my responsibilities, obviously, here at the Gatehouse. You know, I try to do once a month. In the last little while, I've been doing them, and I've been reading a book, and then I would interview the author. And these are all survivors to begin with,
I
right?
love it. I love it.
So this
And
is
you know what you're doing though, like you said though, and I think about this often, but what we could do just by one, I always feel that when I get up in the morning, God, just let me find one, just the one, you know, because we're saving lives though, because coming through childhood tragedy, Stewart, is a matter of life and death. It's not just, oh, maybe I should go back there. It's not like that. It is a matter of life and death. You're either living or you're dying.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when we come through crimes that we came through. And so I applaud you for that work. It's not like you're not going to bring it up, you know, to a social group and say, wow, this is wonderful. And that's what makes it so hard for us all to come together and talk. But the more we do it, the more you see. I saw that beautiful comment to the man that Stewart does amazing things and he has thousands of followers. And a man asked him if he had dreams after he talked about the crimes that happened to him. And you know what, Stewart, it was so beautiful, just that sharing one-to-one. You don't know where that man was in that moment. So I guess I just had to stop and encourage you that all of the work that we do, even if we just find the one, matters, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. But you know, like I mean, for me, like in the beginning of doing that, it was purely for myself.
I
Really,
get
it
it. I
was
get it.
right, and from that, it expanded to where it is now. You know, if I was to go into Blog Talk, personal transformation, which is the platform that it's under. You know, I maybe for all the 10 years, I look at it and I look at all the listens and I think, well, maybe I've had maybe 6,000 or 7,000 listens after all that time, and then I look at other podcasts, and again, I'm critiquing myself and I'm thinking, well, wow, should I be more? Well, no. Again, my goal was to just do it for me, and now it's academia uses it, so I've done
That's so
something
cool.
good
Right.
that helps me feel good, and not only that, but I'm continuously, like here at the Gatehouse, we have placement students coming here that are finishing whether they're in a criminal justice program
Oh, that's
or
neat.
anything to do with the courts, or they're going to become social workers. They come here to do their placements, and the same thing if we
Wonderful.
have therapists that come in here that have graduated and they have to do their placement, right? So they come here and they listen to my podcast, and then they send me, they give me their feedback, and then I do the same thing there. So to
I
me,
love
that
that.
is hugely important. Not only helping people coming into the mental health industry, and sharing my experiences, but also helping them understand, well, this is what you could be dealing with, right? Okay, I am a survivor of substance use, but what if I come with a whole bunch of other things? What happens if I'm struggling with DID or just a DID or bipolar or ADHD or a whole bunch of other things?
Right.
Because or addictions, right? There's all kinds of things that they could be dealing with, not just your childhood substance abuse. So to me, that brought me great strength and made me feel good and you're doing that, and I'm part of that to whatever degree. Makes me feel really good. So it's one of these unexpected things that kind of happened, right?
Yeah, it's awesome. I love it. One of the things I like to talk about too, just you were talking about through your experience, is there anything that in childhood could have helped you? And again, just going back to that time, would I have disclosed earlier if I would have told somebody had this happened? Talk about that just a little bit. What can people do in their lives today to make sure? And, you know, I see a lot of these little videos that they show kids and, you know, don't say that, but I'm not sure that really finds the perpetrator who's groomed this child, really. And so, because you and I both lived it, right? And it's much more than that. It's not just a one-time little 30-second video where this kid's going to tell that guy, oh no, or the woman, no, I'm not going to. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you know, that's a really good question. And I think the biggest thing that needs to be done, that families need to do, anybody is have the conversation, right? most people do not know how to have this conversation, and it kind of falls back to what we were talking about in the beginning, before we started doing our interview, is like in the States, I talk about Aaron's Law, right?
Mhm.
Children need to be taught from a very young age in school that what a consensual consent, or rather consensual touching, what that means, what that's about. Because if you're a child and this is happening to you and you don't know where to go or who to talk to, especially if it's happening in your family, who are you going to talk to that you can trust, that's not going to come back and it's going to happen tenfold worse? Who do you
Right.
trust? So it's got to start someplace. So I would say, to your question, it's got to start in the school system, right from kindergarten, right through until they're done high school.
I love that.
Colleges, universities, they're already talking about it, whether it's here or in the U.S. or any other country throughout the free world. I know that for a fact because I deal with it all the time. I know we have these conversations because I'm part of the conversations. So I know that's happening, but it's not happening in the schools where it really matters. So if you're a child and this has happened to you, who do you tell? You can't go to your parents. Your example from your experience that happened in your family. So who do you go? If you go to your guidance counselor, what's going to happen? They're going to come back, bring the police in, and you're going to get pulled away from the family.
Right.
See, there's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of scenarios that could happen.
It's complicated.
Maybe it's very, very complicated. And I think
Yes.
you not understand that. And maybe that child does not, maybe there's only one parent that's abusive in the family. And pulling a child out of the family may not be a good idea because one parent's abusive and the other parent is not. So what's going to happen to that child when that child's taken out? They're going to get put in the system. They're going to get abused again.
Right.
It's a big circle. So addressing this from a very young age and having the proper, the proper channels for the child to follow, whether it be they're in kindergarten or in high school or, is very, very important. And being able to have this conversation to begin with, and not feeling that the child could, as I pointed out, could get taken away, or so the child feels safe and not worried that something's going to come back and make it worse for them.
Right. Because pedophiles make children implicit, complicit, all of those words with the crimes. They want you to believe you're part of it. That's part of the secret. And so it is complicated and it cannot be done in one message. It cannot be done in one message. It has to be a succession. I was a trainer in a law firm and I used to always say early and often. You've got, and it can't just be one message. I so agree with you. So we've almost come up to our hour, Stewart. I'm telling you, these are the things that just encourage my life and make my life joyful, honestly, because we are doing something so that children won't not only come through those, but then have to live a life that's just all screwed up because of the lasting results. I like to give the time back to you. We've got a few minutes here. If there's anything that you think that we forgot, I want everybody to know, for the viewers, I'm going to put the Gatehouse and all of his contact information in the description of this on the YouTube channel so that you can connect with him, because he's a fabulous person to follow and connect with. But I just want to leave the few minutes with you. If there's anything that we've forgotten to talk about or anything that's important to you to message, I'm just going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Jody. I really, really appreciate your time and being here today with you. And maybe we could do this sometime again. And maybe
Absolutely.
I can reciprocate an interview for a change.
I'd love that.
Yeah. But there's one thing I want to drop in here as well, which I think is very, very important. Being Canadian and being in Canada, one thing that I've done I'm a co-founder of, along with Art Lockhart, and lots of words, Christy White, Rosalie Riviera, and Art Lockhart, which is the founder of the Gatehouse. One thing we have started here, we are the second country in the world to do so. And I know the United States is going to follow behind us because they're working on this now. It may already be done, but we have created a Survivors Council of Canada.
Oh, that's awesome.
And behind Germany was the very first country in the world to do this, and we're the second country to do this. And I'm pretty sure that the states are going to follow right behind us, as well as some other countries in the G7 are going to do so, and even in the G20 that will probably follow suit. But behind this is what we do is we're advocates, but we're also the people that are going to be knocking on on our government doors, and not just in our own country, but internationally. So, you know, if you look at statistics, and you would see that, well, if you're looking at a report card, you see that Canada is one of the is probably the highest country in the G7 that spends money towards sexual violence. But it's far cry from what it could be, or here I'm going to use the word should or could, because there's no shoulds or coulds. It just needs to happen. But we advocate, and we're knocking on those doors. So every time there's a G7, which just happened in Tokyo, for example, we were there knocking at government's doors saying, okay, man, we need money here. This has got to be like for sex trafficking, for example, right? You know, we're speaking with our federal government, with Safety Canada, which is kind of like Americans with your border guards. Same idea. But anyway, we want money so that we can make the internet safer for children. So they need to do more for that. But anyway, we advocate towards things like that. And we created this. So as an example, like I talked about Aaron's Law, it's in the States, it's in 38 states, around 38 states in the US. And now it's going to be coming into Canada as well. So when we talk about consent, as we were talking about earlier, so we have a lot of things going on here where potential change is going to happen. And what I love about my job is that I'm so connected with people around the world, just for this reason. So I would suggest to my friends that are listening and watching, not just for what Jody's doing, for what I'm doing, and other advocates that are out there, not just Survivor Council in Canada, but watching your own countries, because this movement is getting stronger and stronger. In fact, if you want to know more about it, like I'm talking about in regards to G7, just go to just type in Brave Movement. Google Brave Movement, and that'll give you an example. I'm not really involved in the Brave Movement. I have been in the past, but one of our members, Rosalia Riviera, who lives in BC, part of SAGE, she's the chair of that. But they talk about the Brave Movement and the G7, what's actually going on, and what we're doing internationally to make this safer for our children moving forward. I love that. So I wanted to throw that in. I love it. Talk another half hour of the things that we're doing and got going on. Love it. But I wanted to throw that out there so that people around the world know that, yeah, we're fighting just like Jody is, and other people in other countries are actually doing something to try to change policy in regards behind childhood sexual abuse, making it better for our children moving forward, and also having places so that not only children, but children that have grown up to be adults, like the Gatehouse, have a place to go and talk about their experiences and have some kind of healing. Because really, what happened to us was never our fault. We were children. So you need to remember that. But as adults, it is our responsibility to correct ourselves and do whatever we need to do to make better lives for ourselves. Because you can't let go of the shame and the guilt. I'm a prime example of that. Sure, it comes up in crops with me from time to time, but you know what? It doesn't rule my life anymore. You know what? When I talk about loving myself, as I did earlier, it is possible, right? I'm not saying that's possible for everybody. It is possible to do that, but you have to work on yourself, as I did and others have done, and to realize, as I just pointed out, we were children. It was never our fault, and we deserve so much better than that. You are worthy, as I am worthy, and Jody is worthy. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in, and I really want to thank you for allowing me the time and the space to be today, Jody.
It's wonderful. And I'd love to do this again. I do want to spend more time with you. I could talk to you for another 4 hours, I'm sure.
Easily.
It's wonderful. And so again, just for the viewers, I'm going to make sure that all those links are in the description.
Yeah, I'll have to send them to you.
Yeah, go ahead and I will. We'll get those afterwards. But keep this conversation alive, Stewart. Thank you so much. I am just so proud of the man that you are. None of us are perfect, but you know what? You're a remarkable man, and it's been so great to spend this time with you.
So kind.
Thank you.